Well, it's 100 days since Barack Obama was inaugurated President of the United States, with great hopes of many of the people. They've been very busy back there in that building, as you no doubt know. What have they accomplished? What have they not accomplished? What have they set in motion that they're hoping to accomplish? We talked to 6 experts here in Washington in areas like economic policy, domestic policy such as healthcare, the environment, and military and foreign policy, and we'll show you what they had to say here in a moment. But let's start with a bit of a historical perspective on things.
Well, 100 days is a conceit, a historical conceit in many ways. Really the first American president who was tested, who was judged on his first 100 days was Franklin Roosevelt. And no president since then has had this kind of attention to his 100 days. And of course, the Great Depression was the context for FDR's first 100 days. I'd say there have been 5 presidents up to now who really tried to do a lot in their first 3 months or so. And they've all been presidents who we look back on as transformative figures in office. Thomas Jefferson, Andrew Jackson, Franklin Roosevelt, Abraham Lincoln, and Ronald Reagan. All of them followed a president who was unpopular, who was at the head of a coalition which had pretty much eliminated itself as the majority party during the previous administration. And Obama also is coming into power at a time when there seems to be a desire among most Americans for a big change. And he, of course, represented that change both in his person and in many of his policy suggestions during the campaign. And so he, unlike George W. Bush, unlike George H.W. Bush, unlike Bill Clinton for that matter, is someone who, about whom a lot is expected, because there's a sense that an era has ended with the end of the Bush presidency. So he really has to try to do a lot. And so really the focus on his first 100 days makes a lot of sense, I think, because he does want to go down in history as a president who has changed a lot about American policy, both at home and abroad.
I think the key word that Michael Kazin used there is transformative. Every president wants to be transformative. Very few actually are. And I think he pinpointed the 5 or so who have been most transformative in American history. Now, Barack Obama, to a certain extent, has transformative forced upon him. He has to be. The country has so many problems, domestically and internationally, that he has to be transformative and make pretty serious change in a lot of different areas. Whether he'll accomplish that, American people have a chance to judge in 4 years. So I'm here in front of the Lincoln Memorial. That's the memorial to Abraham Lincoln. He's the 16th President of the United States, one of the transformative presidents in the history of the country. Also a wartime president. Virtually from the day he took office, he was dealing with the Civil War. Barack Obama is not, of course, dealing with the Civil War, although maybe if Texas secedes, he eventually will. But he is certainly a wartime president, and having to deal with wars on 2 fronts, and a whole lot of international conflagrations going on around that. A lot of complicated questions that he and his people need to address and settle. So how's he doing?
Probably one of the most significant events over these first 100 days reflects the Obama administration decision to review from top to bottom the Afghanistan-Pakistan strategy, which obviously was failing. They have countries on their borders who have interests and whose decisions affect success in those countries. So the new policy talks about a diplomatic surge that will engage Iran, that will engage India, that will engage China, Russia, the stands. Again, that's a shift. I think one area where we haven't yet seen the kind of change that presumably is going to take place is in how the U.S. is going to deal with post-conflict situations around the world. Clearly the administration, Obama during the campaign, Secretary Clinton in her testimony, has talked more about civilian leadership, both in diplomacy and in dealing with the problems of fragile states and in post-conflict situations. A third area, I would say, is how Obama has begun dealing with Latin America. Finally, I guess I would say that the administration already has shown a different attitude towards the United Nations, the World Bank, the international multilateral organizations than its predecessor. And there's the decision, for example, to seek to become a member of the Human Rights Council at the United Nations, despite the concerns about the nature of the way that council has recently operated, represent a decision to engage rather than to isolate. And that's probably positive.
Well, 100 days into President Obama's administration, I think there are some really significant things to look at in the way that he's dealt with Americans' national security. First of all, he's gotten away from the war on terror rhetoric that really defined President Bush's administration. He recognizes that America faces threats. These threats are not monolithic. They shouldn't be conflated together. In regard to Iraq, his recognition of the need for a withdrawal timeline, I think, was significant. This was part of the agreement that was arrived at between President Bush and the Maliki government, although President Obama's decision to withdraw troops from Iraq cities and draw down to about 50 to 60,000 by next summer, ahead of the scheduled withdrawal in the Status of Forces Agreement, I think says a lot about his recognition of the need for Iraqis to really take charge and take control of their own security. As far as Afghanistan, rather than giving the commanders absolutely everything that they wanted, he announced a more limited increase in combat troops, but a significant increase in civilian trainers. And I think this goes to his real perception of national security in a way that goes to questions of governance and real human security. It's not just about guns and tanks and bombs. It's about providing services to people. It's about creating a situation in which extremism doesn't get a chance to take root, where people are secure, they're able to go about and do business. And I think this is a significant shift in the way that we understand our own national security. I think really he's made a very good start, I think, into, I don't want to say rebranding, but maybe representing American ideas and American values to the world. His decision to release the memos about torture and to announce that the United States does not torture anymore, I think it really can't be overstated how significant that is. I think the torture was a huge black mark on America around the world.
These are areas where Obama made really specific campaign promises. With respect to Iraq, he said that the United States would be essentially withdrawn 16 months or 18 months. With respect to Afghanistan, he said that we would step up that war, but that we'd see progress and results in a relatively short period of time. So that's what you do as a candidate. Now what you do as a president may be a slightly different thing. He seems to be proceeding on the Iraq timetable, but is he really going to be able to hold to that if the situation worsens? Probably not. And on Afghanistan, violence is kicking up, and of course there's everything that's going on in Pakistan, the western provinces right next to Afghanistan. So this is an area where a president is usually more likely to break campaign promises, because it's one thing to be a candidate, it's another thing to be the commander-in-chief of the armed forces when you actually have lives in your hands. Now, one campaign promise that he has stuck to is that he would change his and America's approach to the world, talk to people, shake Hugo Chavez's hand, extend olive branches, see if olive branches were extended back in return, places like Iran and Syria. So this he has lived up to so far. Obviously, it was way too early to see if there are any results to be yielded from this. But this will be a very important test of his philosophy and of American liberalism, because we just lived through 8 years of seeing this neoconservative approach of kind of stepped up belligerence and mistrust that was answered in kind with belligerence and mistrust from the rest of the world. So Obama thinks, let's drop that and let's try a new approach and see how that's answered. The next 4 or 8 years, if he's reelected, will be a big test for whether that philosophy can carry the day and bring better results. That, of course, is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the President of the United States in the 1930s and 40s, creator of the modern welfare state, and of course the first president to whom this whole concept of 100 days was applied. Roosevelt had the most ambitious domestic agenda probably of any president in history. Barack Obama has a pretty ambitious one too and faces a lot of the same problems Roosevelt faced. An economic crisis, what to do about banks and regulation, other domestic issues like health care that are very pressing, and now there are new issues that Obama has to face that weren't thought about much in Roosevelt's time, like the environment. Here's what our panel of experts had to say about how Obama's doing in those areas.
When President Obama took the oath of office, he had not one but two agendas, the agenda on which he'd campaigned and the agenda that events forced on him. And many of us wondered how he would deal with that, and the answer is he's doing both. So at the same time that he's put in motion a very broad-based plan to stabilize the economy and restart growth, bail out the financial system, he's also made a number of very ambitious domestic policy proposals. Universal health insurance for one, major climate change legislation for two, a brand new energy policy focused on renewables, and major new investments in education and infrastructure. Those are the big five, and any one or two of them would have been enough for a less ambitious president, but not for this one. He's proposed almost everything and accomplished almost nothing up to now. And so the major battlegrounds, certainly for the next year or year and a half, will be the struggle to enact the agenda laid down. And that will not be easy. In the case of health care, not only do a lot of entrenched interests have a lot to lose, but also a venture that will probably cost a minimum of $125 billion per annum will have to be paid for according to the terms of the emerging congressional budget resolution. Climate change, deeply divisive, not only or primarily along partisan lines, but along regional and sectoral lines. A new energy policy, well, there are a lot of people in the hydrocarbon business in the United States who sort of like it that way. And when you're talking about major new investments in education and infrastructure, then the question is, first of all, how do you guarantee that it's not new wine poured into the same old bottles, but really constitutes a force for reform? And secondly, in a period in which budget deficits are soaring into the stratosphere, or, almost 12% of gross domestic product in this fiscal year, and not much less next year, and $1 trillion a year as far as the eye can see, how do you pay for all this stuff? So these are big issues on the president's plate.
It's hard to judge President Obama on the economy because he inherited such a mess. So first and foremost, I think he gets high marks for what's called the stimulus plan. There's around $800 billion spread out mostly over the first 2 years or so, which is a much larger sum than was imagined right after the election. I can imagine ways that the stimulus plan could have been more effective. I think that some of the tax cuts are ineffective. All of the tax cuts that went to business will be tremendously ineffective, but some of that is a political price to pay to get something through quickly. I think where the president doesn't get real high marks is on dealing with the financial mess that we're in. We haven't seen exactly how he's going to re-regulate. The bailouts have been quite unpopular, and in many circles, including most of my friends and me, think that it's been done in a way that kind of preserves the existing financial structure and those who are too big to fail, without sufficient strings on the banks, and thinking that we may not get what we need. But he's also rising to other challenges. He hasn't backed down on the need for a bold healthcare initiative to provide universal coverage. He seems to be holding to investing in energy alternatives and having a cap and trade and cap and auction system to address climate change and provide incentives for energy alternatives. It seems like people are giving him a lot of latitude, understanding that he's got many, many problems to fix. He's doing his best. It's going to take time. But the reality is that things are going to worsen from where they are now, and they're going to stay bad for a while. And how that really plays out is a pretty big unknown.
Barack Obama has shown incredible leadership on the environment, on global warming, and really taking on the incredible importance of climate change as an economic issue, as a fundamental issue for governance, for our role in the world as Americans. He's made this a centerpiece of his view on governing both domestically and internationally. I think that in the first 100 days, he's accomplished more than the United States has accomplished really in the last decade. He said, he made the determination during the campaign and then immediately following his election that he was going to make economic recovery and stimulus package a top priority. But right from the beginning, as he thought about the sorts of investments that were needed to put the economy back on track, to rebuild our economic standing, he identified energy issues and unmet environmental issues as a key infrastructure challenge. So he looked at opportunities to rebuild our schools but build them green, to rebuild our electrical grid to enable more renewable energy, to do investments in scientific R&D, but to do it focusing on the particular challenges of solar and geothermal and advanced batteries for electric cars. And then as we've begun a conversation about how to save and then restore the American auto industry, again, fuel economy, building a new generation of vehicles that are using less oil to provide the same amount of mobility is really at the center of this. So really throughout his agenda, the thing that's striking to me is that the environment and global warming are a lens for looking at broader economic functioning and broader economic productivity. So it's not just a side issue, it's not a checkbox that you deal with and then put to one side. It really is a way of looking at how are we performing, are we doing the best we can, are we getting the most value for the investments we make, and are we really regulating in the long-term public interest?
That's a representation of a bread line. We had a lot of those in the United States in the 1930s. We don't have them right now. We do have hungry people, of course, but we don't have bread lines. The economy hasn't quite gotten that bad. But it's still pretty bad, and it's still the central challenge that Obama faces. I think of all the people we talked to there, I think Bill Galston said a really interesting thing. Obama has two agendas. He has the agenda that he campaigned on and brought into office, things like health care and the greening of the economy. And then he has the agenda that's been forced on him, create jobs and do it fast. That's a heck of a lot for anybody to handle. The report card so far? Well, everything's an incomplete after 3 months. But I'll say two things. The first has to do with health care. Universal health care, or something close to it, has been a liberal goal in the United States since before Franklin Roosevelt's time, actually since Theodore Roosevelt's time. And 4 or 5 presidents have tried it, and it's been beaten back every time by powerful lobbies. Obama hopes to pass some kind of legislation this fall. If he can do that, it really will be the fulfillment of the biggest piece of the Franklin Roosevelt legacy, the New Deal legacy, that has gone unfulfilled. So it would be a tremendously huge victory for American liberalism if he manages to get some kind of health care legislation. The second thing to say very quickly is that the next 4 years or 8 years are going to demonstrate whether, again, state intervention in the economy works and produces the right results. Tremendous things at stake politically here, right? Because if Obama's path succeeds, then the Republican Party, which has been saying for the last 100 days that this is socialism and this isn't going to work, is just about finished. If things don't go quite Obama's way, we'll have a more lively conversation on our hands. And finally, on the environment, the issue is very much as Bracken Hendricks said. Since the 1970s, when the environmental movement came into being, the environment was a separate issue off here in its own little area. It dealt with things like endangered species and, to some extent, clean air and clean water. But now the environment is part of the economy. The environment is part of the larger conversation. The greening of the economy, of commercial construction, residential construction, new cars, that's all part of the environment and the economy and domestic policy writ large. That is a huge change. That's like moving the direction of an ocean liner to change American domestic policy from that old style of definition of environment to this new style. If Obama can do that, that also will be a huge victory. Now I'm standing on the National Mall. That, of course, is the Capitol building behind me. The Lincoln Memorial's directly that way, the White House that way, the Franklin Roosevelt Memorial that way, all fairly close. Why are we here now? Well, because as Obama proceeds past his first 100 days and into the next 3.5 years, Capitol Hill and the halls of Congress is where it's all going to go down, where he's going to get his victories or get his defeats. Is he going to be able to pass health care? Is he going to be able to pass the kind of budget he wants, the kind of tax policy he wants? Is he going to get Congress's cooperation on his foreign policy initiatives? Is Congress going to push him, and this is another interesting question, on torture and civil liberties questions in directions he may be unwilling to go, because he has said we don't want to dwell too much on the past, which is a position you'd expect him to take. People up there have different ideas about that. So overall, if you ask me, I say pretty good to very good. Maybe a B+, maybe even an A-. There were some missteps at the beginning with some appointments. There have been a few false notes here and there, but basically he has proceeded on several fronts in a very aggressive direction. And he really has signaled that he's definitely intending to change the direction of the country on the domestic front, on the foreign policy front, in the short term and in the long term. He wants definitely to be a transformative president, and people are already getting the message. Pretty substantial majorities of people support the direction he's taking the country. Much larger percentage of people think that the country's moving in the right direction as opposed to the wrong direction, which was certainly not the case last fall when very few people thought the country was going in the right direction. So, a lot of questions yet unanswered and won't be answered for a while, but this administration's off to a fast start.